Hey guys, Brooke Whipple here. Welcome to my channel. I'm Girl in the Woods, and today I want to talk about Alone Season 4 and our experience out there. Stay tuned. Alright guys, I got a cup of coffee and I got my journal and I'm ready to talk about why we tapped. In my mind, they didn't really portray why we tapped very well, so I just thought I'd talk about it. Alright, first thing I want to do, guys, is just tell you thank you so much for all of you that followed along with our story and gave us encouraging words and were cheering us on. We really appreciate that. This experience was absolutely amazing. To see it unfold on TV, you never know how the editors are going to put it together. And you have to remember that you're seeing virtually, probably less than 1% of our actual experience out there. I mean, we were out there for 7 weeks, and on TV you maybe saw 40 minutes of our journey, maybe half an hour total. I really don't know. But you're not seeing a lot. And so there's a lot of people that have questions, and they answer their own questions with a criticism or a judgment, and they just don't understand that you're not seeing the whole picture. So I just want to talk about some of those things that maybe you have questions about too, and I'll be happy to reply in the comments as well. So first of all, Dave and I were out there 49 days. We're extremely proud of what we did out there. We have absolutely no regrets. We put everything into our journey and we left nothing on the table. So we just feel really good about it. I'm going to get into my journal here. These are some notes that I took after we got out so I can refresh my memory. Let's talk about the day we tapped and why we tapped. I'm looking at my notes here, and occasionally the production will come out and do medical checks and evaluate you. It's completely random. You never know when they're coming. Weeks could pass before they come out, so it's always random. And so by the time we were getting towards the end, I knew I was getting to a critical zone with my weight. They had come out 9 days previous, specifically just to weigh me and to tell me that I'm entering a danger zone, and we collectively needed to change strategies with food if I was going to be able to stay out there. Which really, when you get out there, yeah, you think, oh, well, you just got to change your strategy. It's not as easy as that. And I'll go into that later, but I'm going to stay on track here about my weight. So, I'm looking at my notes here, which is pretty interesting. I wrote this down after we got out, that on day 21, I had already lost 10 pounds. So I was down to 115 on day 21. On day 35, I weighed 109. On day 42, I was 101. And then the day we tapped, they took us straight to the hospital once we got into Port Hardy and did some checks on us. I weighed 97 pounds. And my blood pressure was 80/50, and I had a low heart rate. And I asked the doctor, I said, on the next med check, which was going to be either that day or the next day that we had tapped, which of course we didn't know, but I said, would you have pulled me? She said, absolutely. She said, you made the right choice coming in. You're done. So we did feel good about that. We knew it was coming. We knew they were going to pull me if we didn't just do it ourselves. And we actually wanted to be the ones to make that decision. So, yeah, I mean, you can't really tell. You can tell looking at my face, but what you're seeing is like I've got long underwear on, 2 pairs of pants, and my rain gear. And you can't really see what's going on underneath there. But I was like a skeleton. And that affects you so immensely, so incredibly, deeply affects your energy levels and your functioning. And those last few days, I was starting not to want to get out of bed. I was not feeling well, like not just a hunger feeling, but like actually feeling kind of nauseous. And we just knew we couldn't stay. I couldn't stay any longer. Dave, of course, could have stayed longer. He wanted to stay longer, but he's my love. He's not going to make me stay out there any longer. And, you know, we wouldn't have anyway. They would have pulled me the next time they came out, which would have been a day or two later. So, yeah, that's the real story. If you don't, my BMI, I think I wrote down, my BMI was 16.6, and I lost 28 pounds total. So, it was time for me to go. Changing strategies on the fishing and stuff. Let's talk about that for a minute. People say, well, you just should have moved. You should have just done this or that. Well, yeah, of course we're looking at new spots. We're looking at different spots. Looking at spots you can access. Looking at spots where it's deep enough. Yeah, of course, all that was taken into consideration. Where we fished was a big rock outcrop that goes into the ocean. And some of the rocks that went out there, you'd have a spot where you could stand, but then it like slowly dropped down into the water. Totally unsafe to stand anywhere here where the tides, this is really deep water. And then also if you're fishing, putting your line off there, you're just going to snag. The barnacles are covered these rocks. We lost so many hooks and line to barnacles on these rocks. So you've got to take into consideration all kinds of things. Walking to a new location, there just wasn't any other fishing spots. You're looking at a rocky beach, it's just shallow ocean, and you're not going to catch any fish like that. The other spot we looked to fish was across the bay from us, and to walk there was just insane. Like, it's not worth it to go through an hour's worth of walking to get to a fishing spot. The vegetation on Vancouver Island is nothing like you've ever seen. It's insane. It's so dense. Foraging. People are like, why didn't you forage? Why aren't they hunting? Why aren't they trapping? Because there was no animals there. I mean, the wolves were the only thing I saw there. We never saw any sign of any other animal at all. Dave hiked that entire trip, never saw scat of any kind. Only heard the one, I would guess it would be a bear when he was at camp one night. There's nothing there. I remember one time seeing a squirrel and I'm like, oh my word, it's a squirrel. That was the only time. Songbirds even. I was like videoing songbirds because it's like, oh, songbirds, yay! You know, something new to look at. All you really had was the ocean. That was your source for food. And we had a lot of limits. We couldn't catch, seabirds. You couldn't catch seagulls. We couldn't eat the mussels and the bivalves because of red tide. So there was things that were off limits to us. In a real survival situation, you would absolutely be doing everything you could to snare and catch and eat absolutely everything you could get your hands on. But we were limited and we had to follow those rules. We talked about how easy it would be to catch a seagull. The seagulls were huge and would have been a great source of food, but this isn't a real survival situation, so you can't just pull out all the stops and go for it. So, yeah, food, foraging in the woods, not going to happen. I found maybe 10 huckleberries my entire time I was there, and about 4 chanterelles. So there was this area that was, without expending too much energy to go forage. That's all I found. It's so dense. The forest is covered with moss and moss only. I think I saw one plantain plant right when I first got there next to the beach. That's it. There was nothing there to eat besides what was in the ocean. So you have to be able to distinguish what you're seeing from what the rest of the story is. And there's a lot more of the rest of the story from all of us, There's just so much more going on that you don't see. So let's talk about our shelter. That a lot of people are talking about that. First shelter I built was a good shelter. It was good enough for a while. And I was very proud that I had something for Dave to come back to and settle in so he could get some rest. But I had made our shelter up against a bit of a rock face. So there was 2 cedar trees and then there was a rock face. Now when it would rain, that rock face would leak all this water, and it would drip down into the back of our shelter. And our shelter was on a slope, sleeping. So I would try to raise up the bed so it'd be level. And then back here was always going to be dripping and wet. And it's very unsettling to think that your shelter at all is wet inside. Though we never kept gear or things back there, you had this constant thought that there is something wet in your shelter in the back. And being on the slope was difficult. Even though we built it up, it was a very steep slope there. So we kind of, cramped into each other at night when we were sleeping. And then the fire was on the other side. And when it was wet and cold and rainy, you'd have to crawl in there, get your wet stuff off, kind of crawl over each other. It was miserable. You don't want to be on the ground. You want to be off the ground completely. And being able to stand up is a huge deal. We came into this knowing if we had the resources, we wanted to build a cabin. And the Lord provided a site that had those resources. One quick rabbit trail on the site. People are like, oh, they got such a great site. It was, rigged. We picked our sites out of a hat at the lodge before we left. So those sites were randomly picked. It's the luck of the draw where you go. So get that out of the way right now. So as soon as Dave got there, I think we began building. I'll have to look at my journal because I wrote all this down after we got out so I wouldn't forget. It says here we started the cabin on day 11 and we moved in on day 23. It took us 12 days to build the cabin, and it was, I just couldn't wait to get out of what I call the hobbit hole, which was my first shelter. It was a good shelter, but we made a better shelter, a shelter that was solid. It was off, you could walk in standing up, you had bunks, you had a fireplace. It was so awesome to be able to move into the cabin. I can't tell you how great it was. And people will say, well, we exerted too much energy and effort. We got to look at it a couple of different ways. You're either going to exert energy up front for a good solid shelter that's going to pay off later, or you're going to stay in a subpar shelter and pay for it later when your mental capacity gets to you and it gets colder. And our first shelter was not as windproof. The wind would come right through there. You're always having this breeze in there. So it was nice to be in the cabin, plugged up those holes. I chinked it with moss, and it was awesome. I have nothing to say other than we absolutely made the right choice for us out there to build that cabin. Yeah, it took a lot of energy, but maybe that helped us to stay as long as we did. Maybe if we had stayed in the hobbit hole, it wouldn't have lasted as long. Mental side of it is huge. It's absolutely huge. So building the cabin, it was really something we wanted to do, and we did it. And we don't regret it. Let's talk about the so-called fireplace and chimney. A lot of people are calling those two fireplaces that I built a chimney, but really the idea behind it was to keep the rain off of fire so you could have a fire in the pouring rain, which it's always raining there. So I built up rocks. So basically you have rocks around the fire stacked up quite high. And then on the far outside of the fire, on the outside of the rocks, was my chimney, so to speak. The sticks that would just be there to keep the rain off. Now you had to make it quite wide so it would stay back away from the fire enough so that it would just strictly act as a covering for the fire. People are like, well, duh, it's going to catch on fire. Well, heck yeah, you got to pay attention. Everything you do out there has a risk, and you evaluate the risk and you do the best you can. So yeah, of course, you're not going to be able to build a chimney out there. This is to keep the rain off and keep you having a fire when it's raining. So what happened when it did catch fire was creosote had built up on the very tips of the teepee. And some of the wood we put in there, some of it would spark pretty good. and a spark hit it just right and caught it on fire. It wasn't a major fire, I heard it catch fire, and I pushed those poles out, and there you go. It was fine. I went and cut new green hemlock and replaced it. It's just one of those things we had to keep an eye on all the time, and we did. That's how it works. You do the best you can. So the fireplace actually worked really good for us, and yeah, I would do it again. It's an okay system. It's not a permanent system, and it's not something you do without paying attention all the time. So that's that on the chimney and the fire. We did end up catching. Dave and I equally caught as many fish. We were about neck and neck. We didn't keep exact track of who caught what, but we did catch 54 fish altogether. And of course, you're splitting that, so you do the math. It's not a lot of food over all those days. But the fishing was really good up until about 10 days before we tapped. It seemed like the fish just completely left the area, really leaving us with no food source at all. I mean, there's a few limpets around. You feel like you can actually pick the limpets out of your area. It was interesting with Jim and Ted picking the limpets at night. That's something we didn't catch onto. We didn't know. And they figured that out, so kudos to them that the limpets move around and they're out more at night. But go out in the daytime, you're seeing a finite amount of limpets, and you pick them and they're gone. So we ate the gumboots. You'd have to get those only at low tide. Couldn't eat the clams and the mussels. There was nothing to forage. There was no animals to catch. So it gets dire pretty quickly when you run out of fish. So the crab pot didn't pan out. Oh, let me tell you about those snails. They had a flavor and a taste like I can't really describe. Dave calls it, they taste like bile. It's like, when you're kind of puking up and you get that hot, yucky, kind of acidic taste in your throat. That is what they tasted like. It was unsettling, to say the least, and you're running on an empty stomach for weeks, and then you eat that and it just doesn't want to agree with you at all. We only ate a couple of them, and it looks like it's a good thing. Looks like maybe they can not be good for people. But instinctively, I think they just had a taste that's like, this doesn't taste right. And so that wasn't something we were able to eat, especially on empty stomachs. So that didn't pan out. We did catch 2 crabs while we were there. They were kelp crabs, really small, and it was luxurious to eat those. There's not much meat on those small kelp crabs, but they did taste good. It's nice to have something different in your diet when you have nothing. Talk about food. We talked about food all the time. Food was my biggest challenge out there. It's the thing I obsessed about. I had a really hard time concentrating on anything other than food nearly the entire time I was out there. Nothing else bothered me the entire journey except for the lack of food. I was never scared. I never felt lonely. Of course, we missed our kids, but it wasn't like, we've got to go home. That was never there. It was the food issue for me that was huge. And your brain, your body takes over when you're that depleted, and that's all you can think about. So definitely food was the biggest challenge. Starving is awful. I don't recommend it for anybody. It's a terrible feeling. I know when we'd have a little bit of extra fish, if I could save a little piece for the morning, because we'd usually eat our fish at night or in the late afternoon, it made the biggest difference to me if I could wake up and have just a little bite of fish. And mornings were hardest for me until, about 1 o'clock. They just seemed to drag and drag and drag. Felt like Groundhog Day every day. All you're doing is going fishing, you're cutting wood, you're trying to stay alive. And one day just melts into the other. It just seems like the same day over and over and over. So you got to fight the boredom and keep your mind busy. One of the most fascinating things I learned about this journey was taking away the lack of stimulation, taking away all of the inputs that you usually have in your life, made your mind absolutely come alive. It was definitely like a vision quest. at night, we couldn't wait to go to bed because, for one thing, it was the only time all day you're going to be warm. We'd put hot rocks in our wool socks, stuff them in our bags at the bottom. I slept with one on my stomach and my chest, and so did Dave. So I slept with 4 hot rocks. He slept with 2, I think, one at his feet and one on his chest. It was amazing. The hot rocks were just luxurious. So you get in your bag at night, with your hot rocks. You're warm. Finally, you can rest and turn your brain off because it was dark there from like 5 o'clock until 7:30 the next morning. Lots of darkness. And you go to sleep at night and your mind was like a movie theater. The things that I thought about and the things that I created in my mind and in your dreams, everything was so vivid and clear and crisp, and there was such clarity to my brain during that time out there. It's something I can't explain. It's something you have to go through yourself to understand. So if you need to clear your mind and figure things out, I definitely recommend a fast for 3 days or so and turn off all your electronics and get away from everything, and you will find clarity. It is so amazing. It was striking. You know, wake up and like, what was your movie last night? You know, the movie in your brain was just alive. It was fascinating. Spiritual side of it, it was great. I'm a Christian. It was very great to have that comfort of being taken care of. The Lord was looking out for us. It was awesome. So all the way around, an incredibly interesting journey, something I will never forget. We both said we'd do it again. Yeah, crazy. Unfortunately, Dave could have stayed longer, and he's an absolute hero. Those guys that did the hike, oh my gosh. You want to talk about tough, you want to talk about stamina. That was something. I was so impressed with what he did, with what those guys did that hiked across the island. Until you've been there and seen what they actually had to do, it would blow your mind. I'm so proud of him, what he did. That was an incredible journey all on its own that I didn't get to experience. And I know he'll be talking about it. He's on a trip right now. He hasn't even seen the last episode, and I know when he gets back, he's going to be talking on Facebook. He's going to be posting lots of YouTube videos about our experience and his experience. So be watching for that. But that's just a kind of a quick rundown, guys. Thank you so much for joining us in this journey and cheering for us and being here with us. We really appreciate the support, and it's been great to get your feedback. And of course, there's always people who don't like what you did out there and think you should have done something different, but everyone has to have their own journey, and I hope that helped clear up a few things for you. And yeah, what a good time. Hey, this is Brooke Whipple. Thanks for joining me today, Girl in the Woods. Don't forget to get outside and get happy. Take care, guys.